The opposition stand tall, the opposition stand firm, ladies and gentlemen. The opposition stand for the sanctity of the individual life and the non-existence of the individual. What we say, ladies and gentlemen, is that the exact reason that individual lives are valuable is because they are a unique subjective experience. Not only a unique subjective experience, they are the unique subjective experience, ladies and gentlemen. They are all that any of us have, but none of us have the same one, ladies and gentlemen. That's why the state is so uniquely unqualified to take this decision, Mr. Chairman. That's why the state shouldn't intrude, that's why the state cannot intrude, and that's why we thought that the response to Various Point of Information was so, I think the word is, disappointing. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to point out that this is not a question about whether duelling should happen or it should not. We were told by this side of the House that the aristocracy started duelling. Yes, and the poor, as so often happens, have continued it nobly. What we say, ladies and gentlemen, what we say is that this is something that does happen and is going to happen. We're going to be running a regulate control thing as well, ladies and gentlemen. We think it's much better if it happens in some sort of framework in which there are, I don't know, rules. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about, ladies and gentlemen, today is, first of all, I'm going to be talking about the nature of hatred, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, I will address perceptions. Thirdly, I'm going to look at why China is going to hate this policy. But first, ladies and gentlemen, before I do that like the bravest of therapists, I'm going to delve into Ross's problems. The first of Ross's problems was people not dying. We have two responses to this. Firstly, this means they are not yet good enough at duelling. We think that they need practice, and now they can get it, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, we think there are other reasons beyond the fact that it's a permanent death, that this is unlike slavery. We say slavery is the abrogation of all contractual rights. It's the inability to control your contract in any way. Now, this side have made a lot of the fact that someone might come to you with a gun and shoot you. You kind of buy into that, ladies and gentlemen, when you say that you're right with duelling. No thanks. The very reason that they think duelling is bad is the very reason people will know what duelling is when they sign up for it. The second of Ross's problems, the first of Ross's problems, therefore, people not dying is not so much a problem. The second one is people dying. That's the rest of my speech. So let's look at the nature of hatred, ladies and gentlemen. The covert rights analysis, if you will. We say the nature of hatred is this: big. We say sometimes hatred, sometimes other things as well, but hatred is the most fun, can outweigh things. Sometimes it can outweigh your desire to preserve yourself, ladies and gentlemen. And we think that this is that the state is uniquely unqualified to say how this weighs up for the individual. They give us the idea of an 18-year-old dying, something that is as pathetic as analysis as it is as an image, Mr. Chairman. What we say is that actually, that 18-year-old can make a rational decision about something. But more to the point, the state certainly can't make a rational decision for that 18-year-old. So what that means is that the state, generally speaking, can't know what's important to me. It can't know what's important to you. For God's sake, it can't know what must be important to the opposition. What we say is also, even if the state could know a generality, there is individual variation. A one-size-fits-all policy of no duelling is not appropriate, because some people may want it, particularly in the realms of death, something that they assert is really objective. Okay. Since when was what happens when you die objective, ladies and gentlemen? We think it's the most subjective thing in the world. It's entirely about your own individual belief. It's entirely about what you happen to hold happens when you die. Unless you say that the state knows what happens after death, you cannot compare death with anything else. That's why individuals have to do it, Mr. Chairman. So what about hatred? And that's exactly, for instance, why we allow people to do really stupid fucking dangerous things, like climbing bloody big mountains, ladies and gentlemen. People die all the time, but they like climbing mountains, so we let them take that decision, which causes their death to be more likely. Ross?
First prop said this choice is not unconscionable because when you die, you can't regret it. You said that we don't know what death is. Which of you is wrong and why?
Okay.
Ask your letter.
Some may regret heaven, Mr. Chairman. Personally, I'm not one of them. What we say is that regret, in any sense that means anything, in like a legal framework, or any sense in which we know what that word means, just isn't something that exists in the beyond, ladies and gentlemen. We don't think that that's something that they can say. Okay, so what we say is if you hate someone so much, it may be the case that a life with them in this world too is simply not worth living, Mr. Chairman. We think it is perfectly reasonable for people to take that position. we think it is perfectly okay for someone to say either he goes or I go. But now let's move on to perception, Mr. Chairman. The first perception was that they say it dehumanises everyone because it happens, ladies and gentlemen, we're all somehow kind of tainted by the fact that this is happening in our society. Well, what we say is the only reason that they can argue that is because they say most people don't want this. We think there's lots of things most people might not want to do. Indeed, there are lots of things people might not want others to do. For a long time, like, people didn't want other people to be homosexual. We don't think that's a justification for stopping them doing it because it dehumanises everyone. But now let's look at perception in a deeper way, ladies and gentlemen. I want to provide you now with discourse analysis on duelling, Mr. Chairman. What we say is that for people for whom violence is the currency of everyday life, as the opposition assert, what we say is that they're always going to desire some kind of mechanism of revenge, right? At the moment, what that is that's going at each other with knives in a completely unregulated way. What that means is if two people want to do this, ladies and gentlemen, they are both branded murderers should they succeed. We think that this massively alienates people from the state. What we think is that if you do this, then people have got an incentive to buy in, right? They've got an incentive to take part in this system. What that means is that, like, they've got this... What that means is that it starts to become more of a norm within these communities that this is done according to rules, right? It's done according to a certain code of fairness, and that what the state says about whether something is legal or not does in some instances bear weight. We think that's an important idea to start getting into these communities. We also think that you get rid of the idea that it is reasonable to expect random acts of violence against you if you are part of that community. That's something that's incredibly important, ladies and gentlemen, because we think that actually once most killings are carried out in this framework, people are less likely to think that random acts of violence, arbitrary and unannounced, are okay. And that brings on to why China would hate it, Mr. Chairman. We think China would hate it because it's fair and it doesn't hurt innocent people. So first of all, that it's fair, ladies and gentlemen. We think that the supreme bad in this debate, and we think that's... Oh, Jesus, that was 7. Okay, it's kind of fair because it means that if you buy into the system, people can't kind of go against the implicit agreement that you made, ladies and gentlemen. It means that if you've bought into this, if you've decided to have a duel with someone, there is someone to enforce the rules that you thought you agreed to in the first place. We think otherwise it's involuntary killing, which is much worse. What we say, ladies and gentlemen, is that this is something which is vitally important, but not only because China would hate it, but also because of perceptions and the nature of hatred. I beg you to propose.